I, for a long time, have believed that we only have today to live. Yesterday has already happened. We can regret it. We can learn from it. We can look back and lament it or celebrate it, but we cannot live it. Tomorrow never gets here, right? We can worry about the future. We can try to plan and do all sorts of things, but circumstances change, and our best plans often fall apart when the realities of the day are there. And so it's in the present day that I have long believed that we have to live and be. However, this week, I have changed my mind on that a little bit. The idea that we might actually be from the future occurred to me. Now, that may not be right there something you have wrestled with quite yet, but I did find myself Googling the rules of time travel. And there's actually a surprising amount of information out there about time travel. And a couple of the rules are that you probably shouldn't change anything, and especially nothing big if you travel back to the past. And you certainly shouldn't announce that you are from the future, because probably they won't believe you anyway, but that could be disruptive. So these are the rules of time travel. If you're going backward, I'm suggesting that we are people of the future. Maybe we have traveled backward, and these rules of not changing or disrupting anything should apply to us. We're going to get at that through Isaiah chapter 25, where we hear today that on this mountain the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich foods and well-aged wines, that the shroud of death will be swallowed up and tears wiped away from every eye. Before we get to that 25th chapter, though, I want to back up and get a run at it from the 24th chapter to give us a sense of what it is that the prophet is speaking about this feast into, right? Something about this future promise is a response to the present day. And so we start in the beginning of the 24th chapter. It says, "Now the Lord is about to lay waste the earth and make it desolate." Now, I tend to believe that we do a plenty good job of laying waste to the earth and making it desolate on our own. We don't necessarily need to assign those things to God, but that's where the prophet's at. And then the rest of the first verse of chapter 24 says, "And he will twist its surface and scatter its inhabitants." Scattered inhabitants is very much like people that are migrating. And in our present day, we might think of people migrating for economic reasons as a pandemic has shifted our economics. We can think of refugees fleeing violence and war. We can think of people leaving their home because they can't make a living there. All sorts of reasons that people scatter. Then it says, in starting in verse 2, "And it shall be as with the people, so with the priest, as with the slave, so with his master, as with the maid, so with her mistress, as with the buyer, so with the seller, as with the lender, so with the borrower, as with the creditor, so with the debtor." These are all relationships that are uneven, right? There's a person that has a power or something to sell, and someone else is on the other side of that relationship. And the prophet is suggesting that when all of this terrible stuff happens, there's going to be a leveling. Now, in our day and time, we certainly have unequal dynamics of power, whether that's in our politics, our economics, or other ways. Certainly, they are not leveled out, but there is some leveling that's happening. The pandemic has touched all people. It hasn't touched everyone equally, right? People with resources may have more access to treatment. People without may not. But we are also seeing shifts in our economics where employees have more choices and more options, and that is shifting some of the way that jobs work as people demand more or ask for things that they maybe couldn't before, right? So we might add to this, so with the employer as the employee. The prophet Isaiah continues and says, "The earth dries up and withers, the earth is polluted," it says in verse 5. We certainly have pollution and all manner of things going on with our climate. Then we can jump ahead to verse 7, where it says, "The wine dries up, the vine languishes, and the merry-hearted sigh." And then again, there's in verse 9 and further on down, a note that the wine has dried up, right? There's this supply chain problem that they have in this story with wine that is tied into their joy and their sort of happiness that they have as a community. We certainly today have supply chain issues for all variety of reasons that are complicated. Then we can jump down to verse 10. The city of chaos is broken down. Every house is shut up so that no one can enter. Maybe 2 years ago, we would not have related so well to that, but certainly with our lockdown and all the rest of the things, that feels pretty contemporary. Then we get to verse 16, and it says, "From the ends of the earth we hear songs of praise of glory to the righteous one." Now, this might actually be people who were singing praise even amidst the struggle, but then the very next thing the prophet says is, "But I say, I pine away, woe is me." It could be that the prophet is seeing the reality of the struggle and that sees in these other places of praise perhaps some wishful thinking. Then we get to verse 17, "Terror and the pit and the snare. Whoever flees at the sound of the terror shall fall into the pit, and whoever climbs out of the pit shall be caught in the snare." There's a sense you get there that one thing comes after another, right? And you've experienced that. You just get the car fixed and then the house, something breaks, or you go to the doctor and just as you're getting through one sickness, something else happens, and it just feels like life can sometimes be an endless set of challenges and struggles. So as we hear this 24th chapter, it should sound relatively normal, or maybe not normal, but like the world around us. People are pretty consistent. Several thousand years ago, they were about like we are now, right? So they experienced shifts in where people lived and moved. They experienced shortages of supply. They experienced being shut up. They experienced pain and struggle in all the same ways we do, maybe with some different technology and maybe with some different intensity, but all the way around, we live very much like they did in times where it can feel chaotic and times that can be painful and hard. And it's into that then we turn to chapter 25. And in chapter 25, the prophet turns away from this assessment of the way things are and speaks a word of promise. "On this mountain, the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a rich feast," right, "of these foods, these well-aged wines, the shroud of death swallowed up, tears wiped away from every eye." Note, though, that it doesn't say off in the future some other place God is going to make a different world we will escape to. It's on this mountain, right? It's a very present place, but it's a sort of future promise. And I would argue that in this story, God is reaching out of the future into the present to change it. The rules of time travel that I researched this week would say that we shouldn't change the past too much if we go back. Instead, we should try to let things be because we don't know what the consequences are. But when God reaches back from the future promises into the present, the whole idea is to disrupt what it is that we are doing and try to bring things of life into the struggles and pain that we have with the things of death. So as we think about modern day people of faith, right, we too might think of ourselves as coming from the future. That's not the way we think, right? We think in past, present, and the future isn't here yet. But this passage from Isaiah is a promise from the future, as is this table that we gather around. We would say in that past, present, future linear sense that Jesus has died in the past, that we are living in the present, and that somehow Jesus is going to come back in the future. But the reality is Jesus' death and resurrection has already reconciled all things to God. That is done. That is the future. We just don't fully see it yet, which means that the promises of the future, that all things will be reconciled with God, from Isaiah's language, that the whole right of peoples will be gathered around this feast, that death will be no more. Those promises are already true in the future and present. And we as people of faith see that God is reaching back from that promise to change our lives today. So when we gather around this table, it is a meal that Jesus has gifted us with, but it is the very representation of the future that God has already made, where all peoples are gathered around the table. When we invite in this place all people that are here to gather around this table, we are not practicing just present-day living. We are coming from the future to bring that future that is already there into the present. We're time traveling. And we are time traveling and given the call to disrupt the way things are now, the things of shortages and scarcity and death and struggle and fights and all the rest of it, with the things of the future. And so this table is a powerful witness to the promises that God gives us, and not just a witness for us to remember what Jesus did, but to remember forward to who we are in the future and to be those time-traveling people who come from the future to change the present today. How do we do that, right? Well, we've got these promises and we trust that they are true. And when we come from the future into today, we can both announce and we can act. By announcing, we announce the future that we trust to be true and that we come from. It's the way we share our faith. It's the way we witness to the gospel. It's the way we pay attention to the world around us. And anytime we see something of grace, whether it's a little act of forgiveness or a big act of mercy or some compassion or some empathy, or someone feeding someone, or caring for someone. When we see those things and say, yes, that is the future promise already changing the world today, that's how we announce. But we also act, right? We don't just look for those things, we act those things. We bring mercy and compassion into the world. We share our love and our generosity. We pray, we worship. These are all acts of the future that change the world today, because we are people from the future brought into this world today to bring God's grace and love and mercy alive. And so as we go out into the world, we take this table with us, right? We gather around it in this place and we remember that it is this meal from the future that shapes our present, but we go out into the present as people from the future. The rules of time travel would say don't tell anyone we're from the future, and they probably wouldn't get that anyway. But we certainly should go and break that other rule and disrupt the terrible things of this day with the gifts of grace that God has given us, because we are from the future, and that love and grace that we're given to share absolutely can change the world around us today. So I've changed my mind. I'm not stuck in thinking I still don't think we can live in the past, and I am still thinking we mostly have today, but we come at today from the future, and that future very much shapes the way we live. Amen.